Thank you for coming out tonight. Hi, Jami.
Hi, I'm so excited. Should I read something?
Yeah, read first.
I'm gonna read first, um, like a dirty section from the book. So if you don't like dirty things, you should leave and then come back later. I'm just gonna read it. Let's see. So the book is about a woman named Andrea Byrne, and lives in New York City, and she's 38, 39 when the book starts, and she's single and child-free, and kind of watching all the people in her life achieve all these adult milestones while she is not achieving those milestones herself, but she still thinks maybe she might be an adult, and she's trying. The book is kind of about figuring out what that is, and it's also in part about being single too. So I'm going to read a little bit about that. And a lot of the chapters are named after women. And so this one's called Chloe. We meet at a mutual friend's barbecue, Baron and I. Our mutual friend's name is Deb, and she had told me in advance to look out for him. Newly single, she had texted, like newly. Fresh out of the womb, I texted back. Successful, creative, smart, she texted. A catch, I texted. In a year he'll be a catch, she texted. Right now he's a good time. Am I not good enough for a catch? I texted. She didn't text back for 6 hours. Sorry, she texted. Work. There was another pause. Am I mistaken that you want to have a good time? She texted. I had wanted to argue so badly, but I couldn't. Baron and I have an extremely long conversation about potato salad because Deb has made 2 kinds of potato salad, the creamy kind and the vinegary kind. It's a dumb, jokey conversation, kind of worthless actually, but he looks at me with obvious interest and desire. I get a little hot in my pants. He has a shaved head, the early male pattern baldness shave. He cleans his glasses a lot, and I point this out, and he shrugs and says, I can't stand fingerprints. I take his glasses from him, breathe on them, and wipe them on the end of my silky shirt. Like new, I say, and hand them back. You're helpful, he says. At some point in the conversation, we realize we live 10 blocks from each other. Convenient, I say, and grin. Deb lives in a garden apartment, and there are children running in and out of the garden and the apartment, and one of them screeches, and I shudder. Children, ugh, I say. I have a child, Baron says. Just because I don't like children doesn't mean I can't like you, I say, and I touch his arm and feel like both a failure and a success at the same time, because even though I've already fucked this up, I was probably supposed to anyway. 2 normal people walk away from each other right then and there, but instead he gives me a ride home and parks in front of a fire hydrant on my street, and then we make out in the front seat of his car while I ignore the presence of the child seat in the back. He's really aggressive, tongue in the mouth, ear, throat, squeezing my breasts hard through my blouse. I'm both mortified and aroused. I put my hand on his dick through his pants, and he stops and says, You're the first person I've been with besides my ex-wife in 12 years. I say, Whoa, that's a lot for a first date. And he says, this wasn't a date, and I feel suddenly hoarse and damaged. Okay, I say, I'm done. I put my hand on the door, but I give him a few seconds to apologize, which he does. He says, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know if I'm coming or going, I'm having every emotion at once. He takes my hand and kisses it. You're beautiful, he says, you're beautiful and sexy, and she'll let me take you out and we'll do this right. Toxic, says my coworker Nina on Monday morning. Drop him immediately. He texts me on Wednesday and asks if I want to have dinner with him on Friday night. I say I have plans because I'm trying to play hard to get, which has absolutely never worked for me in my entire life. He says he can't see me on Saturday because he has his daughter that night. I fold instantly. I'll move something around, I say. We pick a restaurant in the neighborhood, but it is a pretense because we both know what is going to happen, and we've been texting about the things we're going to do to each other for days. It's terrible, and it's all I want. On Friday, I take off work early and get groomed in various ways. Then I go to Dean and DeLuca and buy blueberries, and then I allow myself the indulgence of a MoMA visit. I paid $25 and go up to the top floor and wend my way through the museum. Eventually, I find myself lingering around their permanent collection. All that work those people made for decades, and here's their greatest hits. 1 or 2 pieces plucked from storage. Better the one piece than none at all, I guess. I miss painting, even the fumes I miss. I've spent the past 13 years looking for a smell to replace it. Hours later, I'm smelling all of him, his fumes. A cocktail at the bar before a reservation. I am 38 and he is 42. I'm just starting over, he tells me. Sometimes I feel like I'm done, I tell him. Dinner is fast, but I still try to enjoy myself because I love food. At the weirdest, darkest, most stressful moments of my life, I always make sure to have a nice meal. I order a steak. I want it rare, I tell the waitress, like bloody red. Carnivore, he says. That's me, I say. We drink 2 glasses of wine each, and I say, you know what we should have done? And he says, gotten the bottle. I never planned that right, I say, and he says, me neither, and we smile at each other. Let's just get along, I think. All we have to do is get along. We walk to my apartment, not his, which he claims is a mess. He's wearing a hat and a chambray shirt and shorts and loafers, and he has an easy stride. I'm wearing a black dress, loose and summery, and I feel pretty and intellectually engaged after my day of art. Also, I feel drunk. At home, there is bourbon, and I tell him that while we walk, and he tells me I'm a dream girl. Like, he literally says, I feel like you were sent to me as a present from the heavens above. And I laugh so hard, but I love it. When we get to my studio, he surveys it and nods, the art, the stacks of books, the pots and pans dangling dramatically from a ceiling rack, while I shakily, excitedly pour us 2 bourbons neat. We clink glasses and then drink quickly. This is so exciting, he says. I'm so excited. I boldly take off my dress. I'm just standing there, naked in front of him. I love all the curves, he says. Hips, yes. He's nodding at me, approving of me. I realize I'm desperate for his approval. This man who is married, this father of one, someone else's, now mine. He takes off his hat and then his shirt and then his pants. He's pale white and nearly hairless, and I realize he has trimmed his pubic hair. Did you? I point to his crotch. I thought I was supposed to, he says. I read it in GQ. I really haven't seen it before, I say. I think I went a little too far, he says. I waxed my chest, too. It hurt. I waxed, too, I say. Just here, though. I motion to my crotch. It looks nice on you, he says. Normal. Our confession's done. We kiss, and then he's on me, and it's fast. It's happening. It's on. He bends me over on my couch, and from behind begins to pound me. There's a mirror nearby, and I can see that he's watching himself, watching his facial expression. This moment has so little to do with me. After a while, we try another position, and then another position, and then another position, and then another one. Can we go back, I say. What? Huh? He gasps, pushes his glasses up, looks at me. I like what we were doing like 10 minutes ago. Hold on, he says, and he stops to clean his glasses with my nearby underpants. Then we rearrange our bodies to the old position, and we move very slowly, and it's fantastic. But then he starts to speed up, and he goes faster and harder, and it feels like he's trying to murder me with his dick. And I say, slow down a little, baby, and he says, I can't, I'm going to come, don't make me stop. So I don't, because this is his first time fucking a person other than his wife in 12 years, and it's with me, and I want him to remember it as great. I let him pound me for another minute, and he orgasms loud, certainly loud enough to be heard from the street below, and he's just so proud of himself, and almost immediately I begin to hate him, but also desire him even more, too. It's tricky to applaud that.
Yeah.
Do we really want to applaud that sex? I don't know.
I think we want to applaud the reading of it.
Okay. Somebody I had to do another event earlier today, and somebody made a really horrified noise in the middle of it, and I was like, did I write a horror story? Maybe this is a horror story.
Well, I think for some people, I really love Nina, by the way. She's a good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nina, her coworker, her millennial coworker.
Yeah, her millennial coworker.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I love the later scene. Anyway, I haven't read the book in about a year, and so I picked it up yesterday to refamiliarize myself and just sat and read the whole thing with delight. It is such a good, great read. So, and it is, unsurprisingly, about growing up or wanting to be grown up or wondering if you're grown up or wondering if what you're feeling is how you feel when you're grown up. And I'm wondering if that's how the book started or if you backed into it a different way.
I mean, I started it, with I wrote 3 stories that were from a nameless character's perspective. I think I had to write about 100 pages of this book before I even knew who it was. Or what her name was, and then another 50 to know the last name of the family, that kind of thing. And I wrote it from the perspective of this woman watching her friend get married in one story, have a baby in another story, and another thing happen. I don't want to give away what happens in the third story, but achieving these adult milestones and her watching it. And then I was like, I have no desire to actually write this book because for many reasons, but I didn't know if I wanted to write about being a grown-up. I didn't know if I wanted to write about a person being single. I definitely knew that if I wrote about being a grown-up, that I was going to have to figure out what it meant for myself, because even though how I feel about it is different than how every character in this book feels about it, you still have to know your own answer when you're approaching material.
Right.
So I put it away, and then I sort of worked out whatever it was that I worked out, and then I wrote, I was like, I really want to write a ghost story. So I wrote 100 pages of a ghost story, but it was all the same characters
Really?
in the ghost story. Yeah, and I kind of like got to know them a little bit better,
Mhm.
although I didn't know that's what I was doing. And then I got to 100 pages. I was like, I'm actually really bad at writing ghost stories, and I should not be allowed to write ghost stories. But I did try it anyway, someday maybe. And then I was like, you know what I really want to write is a 1970s Chicago novel. And so I started writing that, and I wrote 50 pages of that, and there were characters from this book also in that, and
They were haunting you. That was the ghost.
they were the
story,
ghosts, yeah. And so they wouldn't like go away, and then I had a friend who read one of the stories because he was looking for submissions for Virginia Quarterly, Alex G, and he said, I don't understand why you're not writing this book. And so that's really how I said, all right, I'll give it a shot. And I couldn't figure out, I just didn't really, I think I did not want to write a single girl in the city
Right.
book, which this book isn't really.
No.
But because it sort of dispenses with that really kind of quickly,
Yeah.
and it becomes something bigger. It's really just a story about being a woman and being
Mhm.
an adult and
Yeah.
all of those things, and her family and friends and everything like that. But I didn't want to write it, and then I had to figure out a way in to that, and which I did. I was going to read something, but since I just read that, I'll wait. Maybe I'll
Okay,
read it.
yeah.
Maybe I'll read it later. But
And how when you finally found your way in, were you was there a sense of exhilaration and glee, like, oh, okay, this is the story, or were you always kind of a little trepidatious about?
No, once I found my way in, well, so then I had somebody really weirdly the next day after I wrote this first very rough chapter, very weirdly said, there's an opening at this residency. Do you want to go for 3 weeks? It's like a little crazy weird town in upstate New York, and you can bring your dog. And I was like, yes. So I took my dog, and I was in this little town called Coxsackie,
Oh yeah, I know where Coxsackie is.
New York,
Yeah.
where the whole time it was totally empty except for people who I thought were going to murder me. The entire
Yes,
summer I thought I
that
was going to
sounds
die.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I would go to the swimming hole, and some guy would show up and take off all his clothes and be like, I just got out of jail. And I'm like, I'm just trying to read my poetry by the swimming hole. 3 times this happened, and there was just, it kept happening. I was like, I'm going to die in Coxsackie, New York. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right.
No, yeah, I think so,
Coxsackie,
yeah.
something like that. And so I wrote 90 pages in 3 weeks. It all came out, and then I showed that to my agent, and he was like, this is the book you're supposed to write. Really. He'd read the ghost story, and he was like, yeah, sure.
Go for it.
So, because he knows that I really hunger for always changing form,
Right.
right? So, all my books sort of have the same themes in them, but I'm always trying to figure out a new way to invent it, or I'm So this was, once I started, I said, oh, I guess I got to write it. And I kind of
Yeah.
felt like these things weren't getting written about. There's a lot of things. And
Yeah.
it's also my election yearbook, because I started
Yeah.
it in 2015 fall, really started
Yeah.
it. And so I was writing about a lot of things that people were discussing, and I finished it in winter of, or January of 2016, I finished the first draft, and then by June I had it finished.
Yeah.
So I was really using everything that was going on in the world in that as well. So it just had its own momentum. It's also a really short book for me. I
Right.
think it was 170 pages or something when I was done. They made it a really small shape, so it's 200. It's a little bit of a cheat, but
It's exactly as long as it needs
that's
to be.
right. There was
Yeah.
nothing else that I really had to say.
Yeah.
I was done with it. So it just had its own momentum, and then I just felt like I was happy. I was writing it. It kept me company. I was on tour that fall, and so I was working on it on tour and feeling quite content with it. Yeah.
Huge props for writing while you're on tour.
I usually don't,
Yeah.
but actually Meg Waldser told me once. I don't know if she ever told you this.
I've never met her. I
You
would
haven't?
love to meet her.
Oh, you should meet her because she knows everything about
huge.
everything. Because she's written 5 million books, and
Yes.
she's been doing it for however
Right,
many years.
and her
30
mother was
years.
a writer, and yeah.
Yeah, so she knows everything. And so she was like, if you want to be a real writer, I'd already written 4 books, but she was like, if you want to be a real writer, Jami, you have to learn how to write in hotel rooms.
Suck it up.
Write in hotel rooms, write on airplanes, write on trains. Always be working. And so, which I did with this book.
Oh, that makes me so sad.
No, but I'm not doing it on this tour. On
All
this
right,
tour, I'm
okay,
totally
all
just
right,
tweeting the whole
okay.
time. That's it. So
That's good.
yeah, you can't do it all the time. Meg is her own. She's a machine.
Yes. I love hearing advice from other writers because sometimes something really resonates with you. Sometimes something just makes you feel like shit
Yes.
for a while. but then you think okay, that's that's how they deal with all of this stuff, and maybe I.
Everybody has their
do
own
it.
different.
Yeah.
No, but it's good. You can take a little I think it actually kept me company on that tour.
I can totally see that. Yeah.
Like I was
Yeah.
like, I have a little secret. When I go home, I get
Right.
to write this character
Right.
who's so fun to write.
Right.
Mm.
I'm wondering if, because we have all one narrator in this book, and both the Middlesteins and Saint Maisie, and I mean, I've read all of your books, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
So, like, was it because I am always drawn to rotating point of view? It's interesting to me as a writer, and it's interesting to me as a reader. But I'm wondering if that, like, how different that was for you from switching perspectives.
Well, so my second and third book are first person, and then when I got to, and even my first book, a lot of it is short stories, but a lot of those stories are first, but it's different characters. And Maisie is like different. It's all first, even though it's a chorus of voices in there. So really only the Middlesteins is like a close third. Yeah.
Third rotating,
and I loved it. And I do feel like my next book I'm going to go back to that. But this one I didn't. There was no way it was going to be anything other than. I mean, the first chapter obviously is different. But
right. But it's all. I mean, and it's also, because it skips around in time. It has a, it's lively.
Yeah.
It keeps you interested.
It's not a static
No.
then I went out on another terrible date
Right.
and slept with another terrible person or anything like that. Like you see her whole universe.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I went back for more.
Right.
Yeah. I always like talking to writers once a book's been out for a little bit and seeing if they've been surprised by what people want to talk about or what people think the book is about. Because like you think, okay, this is what this book is about, and then it goes out and it's like, oh, maybe it's about something else too, or in addition, or instead of. So is there anything that surprised you?
No, I mean, the only thing that's been really interesting to me is how women of different ages have had different responses to it. So like my Washington Post and my New York Times book review were written by women who are older than I am, who I think maybe are like 15 years.
That sounds about right.
Right,
yeah.
something like that. So they were like reviewing it as like a generational thing.
Right.
Whereas I don't think the younger reviewers were thinking of it as a generational thing at all, because there's access points of a younger character in there too for them. And so they weren't like, there wasn't like, the 32-year-old reviewer for Vogue wasn't like, this is a Generation X novel. Like she wasn't seeing it that way at all. So that's kind of been, I wasn't really expecting that. And I've even had, and I've had like even older people who are sort of like, this is a good book. I can't believe like the sexual world is like that. Like they're like, that's a lot of, but younger people are like, that's like the sexual world is really, they're still sort of actively out there in a different way than an older generation might be, I guess. I don't want to like speak for the older generation. Maybe they're out there getting it, getting nailed, but having terrible sex till the day we'd all die. So that's kind of been the interesting thing. And then it's delight, and also like great, some really nice reviews from men, which I thought even not even a man is going to even go anywhere near this book, which is a shame because it's actually great. So I've even like I just did an interview with somebody from a Flaunt magazine yesterday, a youngish guy, and he was like, well, I just wanted to read. I like to read books where I get to know about things I didn't know about, and I was like, you are a pure heart. You have a pure heart. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
He did not, I think that like sometimes books about emotional intimacy can scare men for obvious reasons. So, so that's been about it. But like, I think people, the conversation about the book is like correct. Like, even if they don't like it, it's correct because that's how they feel.
Right. Have you, I've certainly been struck by how people react to the character of Andrea and how judgmental, certain people are, the Boston Globe headline, was it the Boston Globe? Was so insane. Like
I feel like I want to get a tattoo of it or something.
I feel like you definitely need to, I think you should have it embroidered.
Yeah.
And it said, and it was a good review.
It was a weird,
Prickly, lonely, narcissistic, 39-year-old, miserable in the bed she made for herself.
That is real. That happened.
It is so, but like miserable in the bed she made for herself.
It's so judgmental.
It's so judgmental, and it's so galling, and I have to just add, it's so Irish. I mean, it's so goddamn Irish.
Yeah.
And it's so Catholic. As
Yeah.
someone who grew up,
Yeah.
Italian Irish Catholic, it's like, well, God helps those who helps themselves, Andrea. You
Yeah.
know, like, just what's the problem? But it's so, I thought about it all weekend. It was that phrase was so galling to me because the book is so nuanced about Andrea's emotions, about, everyone in life makes choices, they pile up. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. All you can do is like deal with where you are, and the best you can do is recognize it and be self-aware, which she has in abundance. And I just thought, I literally spent about an hour looking at my bookshelves thinking of horrid male protagonists that no one would ever say, like, well, sorry, James Salter, awful guy from All That Is. He made his own bed.
Yeah, right.
It's so bizarre.
Yeah, it was
bizarre.
It was really like an intense.
It's intense.
It was an intense response to her. Yeah, but that's that's sort of how it's working, right?
Absolutely.
Like when you get the intense response. Because
Yeah.
I had 3 books that came out that kind of like came and went, and then I had the middle scenes that came out, and like I had so many, like I have told this story before, but like I maybe to you, but I don't remember, where like I went and it'd been out for a couple weeks, and it sort of kind of was getting press, but like we were really surprised by it. I was sort of expecting it was going to be like the other books, and then it was sort of building a little bit. And then I went to do a Jewish community center in Boca Raton, which is like the mothership of all JCCs, is in Boca Raton, Florida. And so it's huge. It's got like a huge campus, and there's like security guards to get in, and like I went, and there were like 150 people in the room so I talked a little bit about the book, but they did not even really want me to talk. They wanted to stand at the mic because they all had something to say, because they were either mad at Edie, or they were mad at Richard, or there was a lot of, over the 2 years that I toured and supported the book, there was a lot of Team Edie versus Team Richard, and because the protagonist of the middle scenes was this morbidly obese woman who wasn't taking care of herself, and it was affecting her family, and her husband leaves her, and so people were like, I would have left her, why can't she,
Right.
But I just remember being there and having this moment where I was like, this is actually not even about me, and it's not even about what I wrote, it's like their own experience that they're bringing to it. So then I didn't have the same experience with St. Maisie.
Right.
I think because she was a historical figure, and now I'm back at this, and I'm sort of seeing people who really are reviewing the book in terms of, did I like her, did I not like her? Which I think is like, is it a good book, is really kind of, and I had somebody who, in one of the reviews, they referred to her as mildly irritating, and I was like, you know what, half the people I know are mildly irritating.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, that's who I actually want to go and have a drink with, is the mildly irritating person. I am mildly irritating myself, so like.
Well, in that Boston Globe review, she wrote, she's smart, perceptive, and funny, but her humor usually consists of making nastily clever observations about other people. What is the problem?
Right.
Like, seriously, you're literally describing everyone I like to hang out with.
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of like it's like a judgmental thing, and so I don't know, but a lot of the reviews have been lovely. I just want to say that.
They've been amazing.
There was one review also that was like really, 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 really bad. I don't know if you saw that one, where it was like they really hated it, and then like the whole thing was just really like a big rant. I'm not even going to say what it is, but if you ask me later, I'll tell you what it is. And then there's like one paragraph in the middle of it that just says, but it's really like beautifully written, and like the structure is like totally innovative, and like it's just like, oh yeah, and it's awesome, but I hated it. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's the subject matter. I feel like I always has been that way for me. Like I don't ever question that I am able to write a good book, but it's the subject matter that I choose, and some people are going to be interested in it and not, and but I think I'd just rather have them have a strong response.
Oh yeah, I mean I can't think of many better things than people actually emotionally engaging, like having to figure out their own feelings.
Yeah.
About
Did you get that with The Nest, where people were like, I hate these characters?
Because it really, I had a lot of people, they wouldn't talk to me during the Q&A about this, but then they'd find me afterward, they'd want to talk about their family money stories, and some of them were super sad, and some of them were were awful, but it really, like, people really, like, I had people come to bookstores, and the book groups would show up and say, like, we got really honest with each other for the first, we've known each other for 20 years. And
Yeah.
so it was the money thing that is very fraught, obviously. So yeah, people really wanted to talk about that.
Yeah,
so
it's really, that's intense. Money is scary.
Money's scary.
Yeah.
I remember reading somewhere, I don't know, probably on social media somewhere, but Jonathan Franzen wrote a beautiful blurb for the Middlesteins, and I always remember this. You said that you realized that when you were writing the Middlesteins, it was in conversation with the corrections. And I love that, because I think that's, whether you're aware of it as a writer or not, you are often in conversation with other books, that have come before you. So I'm wondering if you had that experience with All Grown Up.
I did. I had, and that was like really the greatest thing about that blurb was like I'd never met him, I didn't know him, and I was reading that book while I was reading that book for the first time. I'd skipped it the first time it came out, and I was reading it when I was writing that book, and then I was like, he heard me.
Yeah.
I was like, he knew. It was really special. So for this book, so I wanted it to feel. I keep saying like memoiristic, although not like a formal memoir, but just sort of like that she's telling you the story of her life. And there are a couple of times where she sort of breaks the wall a little bit and addresses the reader directly in it. And I just wanted it to feel. So I read a lot of memoirs, actually.
Right.
I read a lot of nonfiction. So I started off by reading, and I read other books too, but these are the ones that stick out in my mind. Patti Smith's M Train. Because I loved Just Kids, but also M Train was kind of like a woman looking back at her life in a different, like almost the grown-up version of herself. And also she just writes whatever she wants to write. She just
so amazing.
She can just do. I mean, that is like the weirdest book and the best book, but it's just totally about the most, whatever they're going to look for Janae's bones or whatever it was. And then I read about half of. Maggie Nelson's The Argonauts, and then I was like, I don't really want to read this because a lot of it's about having a baby, and that is not helpful to the discussion of this book at all. But in a way, it ended up being like I was fighting against it, so I put it away. And then I read, and then time passed, and I was on the road. And I don't remember what I was reading, but then when I came back to it, I actually, in January, when I was really going to finish the book, I finished reading The Argonauts, and was great. And then I read Eileen Miles's Chelsea Girls, which felt almost like, weirdly, even though I was almost done with the book, I was like, this book is in conversation with that book, because it's a New York book, although it's a little bit of Boston too, and also it kind of shifts time. And it's I've seen it billed as like a memoir, and I've seen it billed as like an autobiographical novel and things like that. But it felt very just current still. And then I read The Star Side of Bird Hill, which is a novel by
I haven't read that.
Naomi Jackson, which is a really wonderful, lovely book. And that was kind of there's a lot. It's all women, and it's just really great. And it's about a family, and it's kind of struggling and coming together. And it's written in a very warming fashion, and I kind of needed that, I think, to just as a contrast.
Yeah.
And it was like a group feeling, as opposed to these individual stark voices. So those are the things that it's good that I know that, like, because I can now I like have stacks. Like I've started to get to this place where I have stacks of books that I associate with each book.
Yeah, that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Heartburn.
Oh yeah. Have you guys read Heartburn by Nora Ephron? It's like the greatest book that's ever been written. Kind of.
It's so like. We discussed this briefly on Twitter last week, but like that book was a book for me. I remember reading that book so clearly and thinking, "Oh my God, you can do this!
Yeah.
Like you're allowed to do this."
Yeah.
Like it was a book that made me want to be a writer. It took a long time for that to happen, but I never forgot like her voice and how direct it is and how. Like funny and mean and honest, but also really tender. And it's just, like you said, it's a book that gives you permission. And I love that phrase. And I'm wondering what other books what other writers are there other books that just sort of crack something open for you?
I mean, I love that book because also of her treatment of food in it. Like the part where she's making the mashed potatoes, like she teaches how to make the mashed potatoes, it's just makes you so hungry, and yet like you experience all the emotions that she's figured out a way. And I love writing about food.
Yeah.
So reading Grace Paley, like reading Grace Paley, I'll read her over and over again. And then also I have these the diaries of Dawn Powell.
Oh, I have never read
which
those.
is like, so she it's like over like decades of her life, and so you can open any page and like one of three things is happening. One is that she drank too much the night before. The other is that she's totally broke, and and the third thing is that she's like, I just got the greatest idea of my entire life, and I just stayed up all night writing it, and my life is perfect and beautiful because I had this feeling, and she was an incredibly prolific person, and so I just keep it on my desk, and anytime I'm feeling like kind of like downtrodden, I can just I swear to God, you open it up and you're like, oh, every writer experiences the same thing over and over and over again.
That's amazing.
And it's like of a great comfort to me. So sometimes it's even just about knowing that you're not alone. Yeah. That more than anything. I mean, there's a million books that I've like loved in my life, but like it's the ones that are. But Grace Paley was really important to me because that's all voice.
Right.
That's all voice and heart.
Right.
And compassion.
Yeah.
And so like that's important to me.
Yeah. Harburn, do you want to read your little bit?
I'll read my little bit.
Yeah, I think this would be a good time to do it.
I'll tell you the little. So I have this friend. Her name's Allison. She's my neighbor, and that summer that I started like really writing the book again, she was like I don't know why, like hundreds of these little notebooks that says Randall Island Park Alliance. She's an artist and her husband's an artist, so they might have stolen a box or something from Randall Island Park Alliance.
It came off the back of a truck.
Yeah, really. And so every time I saw her, she was like, do you want a notebook? Do you want a notebook? And I was like, why do you keep pushing notebooks on me? But then the last time I saw her, like one day she was like, do you want a notebook? And I was like, yeah, yes, I will take this notebook, and I will walk around New York City with it, and I will try to write something. And so this was the thing that came out. And this actually was, for a very long time, the first chapter of the book, up until like almost near the end of the writing of the book. And then I went back and wrote another chapter to start over, or to sort of begin the book, because I felt like the book needed a map. And to me, the first chapter of the book is a map of the book. But this is the thing that was my entry point into it being not just about being single. Okay. A book is published. It's a book about being single. Everyone I know tells me about this book. My mother orders a copy for me on Amazon, and it shows up one day. A surprise in the mail, without a note attached, and it takes me a week to figure out who sent it to me. My coworker, Nina, hands me her copy when she's finished reading it, even though I had never expressed an interest in reading it. My sister-in-law, who lives in the woods in New Hampshire, who's dedicated her life to taking care of her sick child, brings it up on the phone to me on my regular Sunday morning phone call. Old college friends post links of reviews of it onto my Facebook wall and say things like, sounds like something you'd like, or this reminded me of you. The book is written by a conventionally attractive woman who is now married and is a critical yet wistful remembrance of her single days. I go out on a date with a man I meet online, and it does not go well. He's the one who drinks too much this time around. He got there early, is 2 bourbons in before I even get there, and I'm patient but then sour about it when I feel like he's touching me too much. And before we part ways, he asks me if I've read the book, and I say, no, have you? And he says, no, I don't read a lot, but it's you. I can tell it's totally about you. And I say, you're single too. Why isn't it about you? And he says, oh, this is just temporary for me. See, it is like a horror novel, isn't it? I go to my therapist and say, why is single the only thing people think of when they think of me? I'm other things too, and this delights her. An assertion is being made, a thesis statement about my life at last. Well, tell me who you are, she says. What other statements are true? Well, I'm a woman, I say. Good, yes. I'm a designer, yes. I'm technically a Jew. Okay, I'm a New Yorker. Good. I start to feel unsettled. Surely I'm more than that. I'm a friend, I say. I'm a daughter. In my head, I think, I'm lonely. I'm a drunk. I'm a failed artist. I'm a shrieker in bed. I'm the captain of the sinking ship that is my flesh. And then I wrote, insert more weirdness. To my therapist, I say, I'm a brunette. I read the book. Well, the first 100 pages of it. The book is a lie. It's a lie pretty women tell themselves. It's a lie older women tell themselves. I'm being lied to, I think. I'm actively being lied to by this woman and this book and society. Who is this book for, I think? This book is not for me. And I think I was like, how do I write the real book about this and the real book about this person? And this was kind of like a little call to arms to myself, like, what's the real story? Like, what's the truth? And the three things that I changed from and it's really close to.
It's so close.
It's weirdly like
it's
super
amazing.
close. Yeah, I really did write it super fast. Like I was like, I got this one. But in this, I say she says I'm lonely, but in the book she says I'm alone because I thought she's not lonely.
Right.
She's just alone. And then also, it says I'm a drunk, and in the book it says I'm a drinker because I thought I'd cut her a little slack.
Yeah, a little slack.
And then also in this she reads.
So you don't want it to be the rehab.
No,
book either.
right.
Yeah.
And then also in this she reads the book, but in my version of it she doesn't read it because she's got better things to do with her time than read that book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Andrea.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the book, she has a hard time answering two questions. But I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
What makes you sad?
Our government is not making me real happy right now.
It's like a real shit show.
It's really bad. It's really, really bad. I don't. It's like you have, definitely have like multiple emotions on a daily basis where you're like you're so angry about what's going on, and then you're like, and then one of these people will say something so horrifying that you get. It breaks your heart too. Like it's just it's just so much inhumanity that's being expressed that we're all having to consume on a daily basis. So, I mean, there's lots of things that make me sad.
It's like a sad time.
These are really sad, hard times. But we're not down.
No.
We're not down by a long shot. So.
What makes you happy?
I really, since I've moved to New Orleans, I feel a lot happier just in general. Like it's it was weird when I had not been to New York since last fall, very briefly for like a meeting, and I went this past 2 weeks ago was when my tour started, and so I was there for 4 days, and everyone was like, "Oh, you look great," and I was like, "Oh, it's because I live in the sun now." And then I was like, but I also felt that was sort of true of my spiritual state, that I lived in the sun, whatever that means. It's like how I feel, although not after 3 weeks on the road, maybe not as much, but I got to get back to that sun. But it does make me really happy to be there, and like my friends make me happy, and really, great food makes me happy, and my dog, miss my dog. So yeah, like that kind of like really simple stuff.
Do you think that change of scenery have you noticed that feeding your writing or your creativity? Maybe maybe it's just your spirit. I mean, it's. I did write and edit the book in the first half of the year, but I didn't do a lot of writing. I did like a lot of essay writing and stuff like that in the second half of the year. I think when you're in New York, you feel like you're like you can't stop. Yeah.
Like you feel like it's just incessant and intense, and it's competitive, and so it's actually really quite nice that I don't feel like I'm able to sort of like take a step back and look at like the things that I've accomplished and maybe think about what I want to do as opposed to just, well, I got to turn on another book.
Right.
Like I think it's good to be able to take the next. I mean, also been doing it I had 3 books come out in the last 5 years, so I'm like, I could take 5 seconds probably.
You can take 5 seconds.
Yeah.
You take 5 seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, if this is your, election year book, like what are our post-election books, man?
I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, but I don't think it's going to alter. People still love good stories.
Yes.
I'm not I think that I consider myself somebody who is a political writer by example rather than writing about politics. The act of writing is political.
The act of telling stories is political. I mean, that's,
You guys we're all political right now, even if we don't feel like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like being aware and all those kinds of things. So I don't know. I'm interested to see. There's no one I know who has stopped what they're writing and thrown it away.
No, me neither. And I feel like, were you in New York during post 9/11?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
feel like
it's just the same.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. But there was that very brief period there where everyone was like, words don't matter, nothing, and that settled down very quickly, and
Everybody got back to work.
yeah.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
It's a very American way
Yes.
of thinking about things.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good. I'm American.
Don't lie in that bed you made. Pull
Right.
yourself up by the bootstraps.
Andrea.
Is this a good time for questions?
Does
yeah.
anybody?
Hi.
Marianne.
One of the things that I enjoyed the most about the book was how occasionally awful the protagonist was. And I'm curious how you managed writing such a realistic person who was occasionally awful, but still like encouraging the reader to be on her side, aside from just being able to relate to her.
Here's what I mean. Again, like me, that I appreciate that interpretation of it, but not everyone feels that way. Something that I did, I had the benefit of a good editor, who at times would be like, just take it down a notch. Like she doesn't have to be that off. Like you've made your point, kind of thing. And then there were times where like the book is really like it is an expression of empathy and compassion, but also that like sometimes she isn't empathetic or compassionate, but that it's an invitation to the reader to impose their own empathy and compassion on like sometimes you can, like St. Maisie was about somebody who helped the homeless. Like that's a no-brainer.
Right.
Like we understand compassion through her.
Right.
So this is trickier. It's a really, like there's a lot of ethical, questions that kind of float through the book, and it's fully an invitation to the reader to like impose their own opinions on it. There is a scene in particular where she is at a lunch with her sister-in-law, and she does not want to deal with like the stuff that her sister-in-law is laying on her. And I had a friend read the book who is married and who has a kid, and she was like, that scene was really, really rough. This was like maybe a first or second draft, and she was like, I really didn't like her in that scene. And I actually went through and like tried rewriting it and tried to like, put her through her paces. And part of the problem of the book of Andrea is that she doesn't ever go to visit her family once they leave town, and she sort of abandons them. And so I was like, what would happen if Andrea went to go visit them? And so I tried to write like some chapters where like we played board games a lot. Like it was like so lame. Like I was like, she's not there. She's not gonna go there. Like that's just not true to her character at all. And so I talked to my editor about it, and she said, well then let's yell at her. And so I had the sister-in-law really give her, like she sort of had let her off, and she yells at her more in that scene. So I hope that sometimes you're going to like her, and sometimes you're not going to like her, but also when you don't like her, that you know that it's okay to not like her, because I'm telling you. I tell you that I'm there with you. And if you don't, you don't. But I don't know. I didn't really like her all the time either. Like she's kind of, she's really tricky.
But I never for a second doubted that she existed, that she was exactly who she was. I know people like Andrea.
Yeah.
We all like to believe that when something really difficult happens, something that really calls on us, that we're going to be there, but it doesn't work. Like life doesn't work that way.
Right.
I mean,
you don't always feel like being there.
And sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you just can't.
Yeah.
Like you can't enter into someone else's pain and be helpful. And like I just don't think people are defined by that. I don't even want to call it a failure, by just that it's being human.
I mean, I know people who are incredibly lovely people who just don't want to ever talk to their mother.
Yeah.
Like they just don't want to. They don't want to really
right.
call their
they've
mother.
They've cut off parts
for whatever
reasons.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't think she ever really does anything that awful.
Mm-mm.
She has like internal thoughts, and she sometimes sabotages herself. But I liked her, and so I think that maybe the answer to your question is because I ultimately liked her, and that I wanted to get to know her and like her and forgive her and all of those things, that shows up, I think, in the writing. So I either like start a book with a character where I really like them, but then I want to figure out what their flaws are, or I start off the book with a character where I don't really like them and I want to write my way into liking them and understanding them. Anybody else?
I couldn't help but wonder when I was reading the book, and you just reminded me that I still wonder if the single girl book was based, like if you had a real book in mind. I'm not going to ask you which one if the answer is yes. I'm just curious.
It's a multitude of single
Got it.
girl books.
Like a reading list of single girl books.
Like, where do I start? Yeah. I don't know. For me, like, no one in my life would ever send me a single girl book ever, but I have an awareness of like what's getting published in the world, and I know that it's certainly an experience for other people where they're like, you know, you just get handed things, and you're like, why?
Yeah.
Like, you know, or people who are like, I mean, I even remember with like the Middlesteins where people are like, I really want to buy this for like my overweight relative. Like, is that a bad idea? And I'm like, I don't know what your life is, okay? Like, I don't know who that person is, and I don't know. I don't think that that's a good idea, though. You know, or maybe it is.
I got an email from a complete stranger through my website a couple of days ago who said that I don't know, he's like has some family trauma, and he wants to make up with his family by reading my book with them, and therefore he needed a signed copy from me.
Sure.
And I was like, dude, this is not the book that's going to heal your family.
Right.
So, yeah.
Anybody else have a question? Hi.
You said that in order to write the book, you had to figure out what it meant to you to be grown up. Does it make any difference in your life having figured that out?
I think so. I think that might be a part of like being a little bit happier, like the little personal journey that I went on to figure it out. I mean, I asked a lot of people. A lot of people don't know what the answer. I mean, I'm going to ask you in a second.
Okay.
Maybe you have an answer. But a lot of people don't know. And I like, you know, I made my mom like write me a letter about it, because I usually, whenever I write a book, I always have one question that I feel like my mother should answer this question. But for me, ultimately, it became about being responsible for your choices that you're making in your life, owning the choices that you make, knowing why you're making them, and like really standing behind them. So for example, like you could get married, right? That's like an adult thing. But like if you don't know why you're getting married, and like also like you're kind of a flake about the relationship and the commitment, then I don't know if that really makes you an adult.
Yeah.
So
No.
I personally like am more conscious. Like writing this book made me more conscious of the decisions that I'm making.
Yeah.
What do you think? What you got there?
I don't know.
Dysfunctional
I mean,
family novelist.
the most knee-jerk answer I have is taking care of other people, but that's really not a choice. Like that's like I definitely did not feel like an adult when I had my kids. I think maybe it's like owning your own desire, and for me, prioritizing that in my life. When I started doing that, I felt like, oh, okay, I'm actually understanding that I'm responsible for the bed I'm making, you know, like the future, and that I have, like, I better make it. I better make it, even if that's like really uncomfortable and really scary and really hard and seems like nuts in some way. Like this is it.
Yeah, and you did it, and you're still doing it. I know. Then you're never done. Then you got to keep going, unless you die.
Then you're done.
Then you're
Then
all
you
grown
got all
up.
that time to rest. Yeah.
We'll just keep talking up here and entertain ourselves. Anybody else? Really, I've come so far to get here, so please feel free to ask me anything.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Do you have an ideal reader? Do you write toward an ideal reader?
Oh, that's a good question. No. Oh, I do have a little bit of a story behind that, which is that when another thing that I should say my editor's name is Helen Atzma instead of just my editor, and she's a wonderful editor. And she, again, was always pushing me to like make her a little bit nicer or something. And so we had this conversation about it where she's like, she's just, she's a little dark. It wasn't about likability. She just really felt like I should cut her some slack. And so while we were kind of still in this editorial conversation about it, I saw there was a book that came out called All the Single Ladies, the Rebecca Tracer book, which I never read, but it's it's like a nonfiction book, but it's really like kind of a study of what
Yeah, I
it means to
haven't- I
be
haven't read
a
it
single
either,
woman,
yeah.
I think. And it's like a lot of like, she interviewed a bunch of single women, and there's like a historical perspective to it, and it's like their impact on society. And she had a book party, and she was in conversation with Anna Holmes, and this was in New York at Greenlight Books. And I'm friends with Anna Holmes, and so I was looking at her Facebook page the night of the book party, and there's a picture that she took of the audience, and it was packed, and it was like all these like, you know, and presumably young, you know,
Right.
single women, and I was like, that's who might read this book.
Yeah,
Like I
that's
didn't
so
write it for them.
Right.
And so, and I was like looking at them, and I was thinking about them, and I said, you know, they're all really good at their job. Like that was just what I got out of it. That was, I don't know. I was
Yeah.
like, these women at a bookstore in Brooklyn, in New York City, and you know, I'm like, these women every day go to work and they kick ass. I just knew it. And so so that was the thing that I wanted to make really
They
clear.
have blowouts.
Yeah, like what, like that I wanted to make it clear that about Andrea was that she was just really great at what she did for a living. She just didn't like it anymore.
Right.
But that she was really highly competent. She mastered it really quickly, and that was it. And she kind of had moved on. So that was maybe one experience. But for me, I write the first draft for me, just for me. The second draft I write for with my editor in mind. Although now we're at 3 books, so like she filters in a little bit in the
Yeah.
first draft, in my head a little bit. And then the third book, I start thinking about the audience,
Right.
and like who could potentially read it, and like.
And so what does that mean, like in an editing mode, thinking
I
about
don't-
the audience?
I don't know the answer. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that like the things that we've already talked about,
Right.
were like are, you know, yelling at Andrea a little bit more, or
Right.
like that. I think that's when it was coming out in that
Right.
round of it, where I was showing it to people
Right.
out in the world a little bit more, and hearing their responses, and me kind of like tweak. I'm not writing a draft. I'm really
Right.
at this point, it's pretty close to what it's going to be. It's more just thinking about how it could be viewed, or how, like, what the holes are, because I definitely want it, like, I know I want to be read, I want to be in conversation with the world, and I want people to, and I didn't have that. The first 3 books, I think I wrote more in a vacuum, and then by the 4th book, I was like, oh, this is, it might be good to sell some books. That would be really nice. But also, like, it would be good to be read.
Yeah.
And what does that?
Yeah.
And what does that mean? So,
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I don't know if I have an ideal reader. I mean, you have also had the same experience of selling your book, getting published around the world, as I've had. And so, you know, for the Middlesteins, it was published in 13 countries, and to go and travel and talk to people and be completely surprised by, you know, I thought I like this Midwestern suburban Jewish family, and being in like Paris, and people being like, this is my family.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. I think family books might be special in that way. Like they just offer so many access points, you know, to people. But yeah.
You could be anyone.
Yeah.
Like it's, for
but
sure.
it was very different. How money is viewed, how family money is viewed in different countries completely changed every conversation we had. It was
Oh,
fascinating.
that's interesting.
Yeah,
Let's
it was
talk more about that
it was
later.
okay.
We'll talk about that, because we're doing it. I'm interviewing her
Okay.
in New York City
That's
in
right.
like a couple of weeks.
We're
for
taking
her.
the show on the road.
Yeah. So I got to remember that. Yeah. Anybody else? Really? Don't be shy. Okay, there we
Yeah.
go.
So, what kind of pressure did you put on yourself after you had a very successful book and then writing another book? I mean, having another book follow the Middlesteins? Is that? I'm sorry, I didn't read that book, but
Yeah. Oh, you
sounds like
should read it. It's really good.
It's really
I
good.
will. I plan to.
It's in paperback now, so you can probably get it really cheap. I don't know. It kind of unfolded, like it did well, but then it didn't sort of like do. It sort of like kept selling. That was like the thing. So then it ultimately became like a successful book. And also, when you're in the middle of it, you don't really realize.
Right.
But you're kind of in the eye of the storm. And I had already started writing, and I actually had written 100 pages of St. Maisie and sold it on proposal before the Middlesteins had come out. So I already knew what it was that I was going to write, and I had sold it because I was so broke before the Middlesteins came
Right.
out that I was like desperate for some money. So they actually got quite the steal on it. but I was just like, I need money like right now. So I didn't. The one thing was that I was on tour for so long that I didn't. It just kept going that it was a different experience of writing it. I think it was more when it came out, and I wanted it to be the same. And every book is different, and now I know that after 6 books that like
Yeah.
be prepared, young lady.
I am. I mean, it's so interesting because I, obviously am very curious about this topic, and I've been talking to writers about the experience of multiple books and what happens. And one thing I've learned is that everyone in their mind has an idea of what the perfect publishing scenario would be, but it's not any of the ones they've had.
Yes.
It's like if I could take a bit from that and a bit from that and a bit from that. But also, it did make me think, and I was very interested when you said like what you want readers, you want to be in conversation with the people, you want the book to go out. And I was having this conversation recently with someone who had enormous bestseller. After a few books, the new book is doing great, and all this author was obsessing about was how do you get the New York Review of Books and the New Yorker to pay attention to you? And I was like, damn.
Everyone has a thing that they obsess about.
Damn, like what? Like honestly, and then her success was hard earned. She wrote a lot of books, that didn't go anywhere, but it made me think to myself, what's important to me? Like what's important to me? And the thing that's important to me is that people read the freaking book. That's
it kind of is
important.
really important. Yeah. Like the reviews are.
I mean, you can, because we all know, and we all know people who have beautifully critically received books that
sell like no copies. Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, that's great. I guess those news clippings or the tabs on your computer now make you feel good, but I want to talk to people. I want to have conversations about, the thing you created that's only there because you made it. Like, what kind of conversation is that engendering in the world? That's like the high I'm chasing.
I really think people would just rather sell books than get good reviews.
I think so too.
I personally.
I mean, I think they should.
Yeah. I mean, I enjoy
well,
getting.
Yes,
reviews.
no one wants to. No one wants.
But I did.
You want to believe that your peers in the community has some respect for what you're doing. That's, of course, everyone wants that in their job. But yeah.
I had an conversation with another author who on this tour, and she has sold many millions of copies of her books, and she really was just like, I wish I would get reviewed.
Yeah.
She did say that, and I was just like, you're doing fine.
Yeah.
Like, just come on.
Yeah, also, like, I don't want the New York Review of Books reviewing my book. That would be bad.
Yeah, right.
They're not nice.
Yeah.
So.
Anybody else?
I have a question. There's lots of writers we've had on our stage talk about the role of music in their writing. Is music play any role in either of your writing?
You mean like in terms of content, or because I listen to it when I write?
Both.
Well, let's see. In terms of listening to it when I write, I have really specific taste, which is like it's either got to be classical music or it's got to be like it could be any kind of music from a foreign country as long as it's not speaking
Words,
to me.
right?
Yeah. Or like the same albums that I've listened to for the last 20 years where I don't even
Right.
like I've heard
Literally
every
white noise.
yeah like any Slater Kinney album like I've heard. I don't hear it anymore. But in my books sometimes in this book it did a little bit because it's kind of like placed her in an era. So she talks about, there's one chapter that's set when she's a kid, and she's talking about, and also her father is a jazz musician. So they talk a little bit about jazz in it. I guess it's there. I almost don't even think about it because I think it is like, it's part of it. It's definitely something that you use to define a character, but it's almost background. I think probably because it is background noise for me that at this point, and I think it meant a little bit more when I was younger, when I was more like actively going out and seeing shows and stuff like that. But now it's in there. It's part of the description. I like to listen to music though.
Yeah.
When I write, for
I
sure.
do too, but I can't have any words. Like, yeah, I can listen to like French Cafe Lounge or something.
And yeah, and also like I've completely missed out on the podcast world because people listen. There's not any time when I want to be listening to someone
Yeah.
talk to me.
I'm driving, and so that's
So you hear it, yeah.
podcast time, but not sitting at home. Yeah, but I remember there was a point toward the end of I guess I was revising my book, and I all of a sudden wanted to make a playlist for it, and I realized that meant that I was understanding something about the book in a very visceral way that I hadn't yet. Because I'd heard of the writers say that they write to playlists for their books, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. I want to do that. I'm going to create a Spotify playlist with chapter 15. And I could never, I would immediately get lost and overwhelmed. And so toward the end, when I was driving around, I wanted to have songs playing that were sort of helping to propel me through this revision, and when I put them together and they were like mood, I don't know, like whatever it was, I just knew that I was like, the book was in me in a way that it hadn't been prior
That's
to that.
There's I don't know if you read did you read Underground Railroad? Colson Whitehead book?
I have not.
Did anyone
It's
read
sitting
that?
on my
Amazing book.
desk.
Did you read the acknowledgments where he talks about who he listens to? Like, and it was like like he lost all his heroes. Like he's like, I always listen to Prince, I always listen to Bo, and he thanks them in his acknowledgments, and he always plays the same albums when he's like in different stages of his book, and he thinks that, yeah. And he
That's
thanks
really
them.
interesting.
Yeah, it's good.
I
mean,
wanna
I would
have
read
that.
I would read the book too, but also you could just read the
I
acknowledgments. if you
always
wanted
read
to.
the acknowledgments first.
Do you first?
Almost
If I know them, I
always.
do. I want to see if I'm
Yeah,
in there.
I don't know. Yeah, no, I am looking forward to reading that book.
It's good. It's a great book. Anyone else?
If there's no more questions, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having
Thanks,
us.
guys.